Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 1, Chapter 13. Kawani had a split second to weigh her options. Even then, she knew her time was up. In the time it took for the weak way to register what happened, Kawani had her body centimeters off the ground, her right leg hooked around her left, and a cap-shattering blow to his right knee as she tumbled through his legs. Stumbling, her finish move sending him hurtling forward, he prepared to brace his fall with his palms down, which was rewarded with a blaster barrel forced into the back of his head. Kawani, fighting the instinct to pull the trigger with all her might, had disengaged the safety as soon as the blaster was unholstered and had it plastered to the Weequay's skull. "Give me one good reason not to redecorate the ground you're eating," she said through clenched teeth. A muffled response and a short blast of dirt and sand from what little was exposed of his mouth alerted her to the force with which he was pushing his head into the ground. She hesitantly relinquished her strength, letting him up enough to speak. "What interest am I to you?" he managed to get out, groaning with the added strain of her knee pressed into his spine. "You? None. What's in your possession? Everything," she seethed. "What?" He had no clue about what she was talking. "Give me the holochip and you walk away with your life." "What? Why? I don't understand," he said, puzzled. "Whether you do or not is beyond my care. Holochip, now," she stated, pressing the barrel further into his head again. Feeling his left arm move to his hip, she glanced down to ensure his hand targeted the pouch she saw him slip the chip into. He did not hesitate and attempted to push up with his other arm, rocking her in surprise. The blast came quickly and too loudly, she thought, cursing herself for being caught off guard, but not at all sorry for dicing the Weequay's brain into the Moss Isley sand. Far too close to the Imperial garrison, she fumbled through his pockets and pouches with little care as to what was being confiscated. She would sort it out later. Right now, she had to get out of there quickly. With little regard for onlookers, she took her prize and lost herself in the myriad alleyways and side streets. She knew she could handle herself in a minor altercation, but had to ensure she was out of sight when the Imperial Patrol showed up. Around two corners behind a small landing bay and into a cargo staging area, she slipped in between beat-up and weathered yellow crates. She took a minute to ensure the area was clear and that she wasn't followed before resting on her forelegs for a better look at her surprise haul. There was more than the holochip she was after. There were three, in fact. Asserting that Ahsoka's was indeed in her possession, she activated all three of them. Ahsoka was right in the middle of them, flanked by a Corellian male and a Wookiee. 10,000 apiece for these? I wouldn't dare try bringing in a Wookiee for anything less than 50, she said to herself. 150 for Ahsoka? They must want her badly. She finished, astonished at the enormity of the bounty. That has to be Imperial, she thought. No doubt from the incident on Arshada, but she all but invited a hunt by Vader. She shook her head, trying to relinquish the thought of how much of a nuisance that could become. There were a few variables that didn't quite add up, however, and she wasn't sure if she should head back to the ship and lay low for Ahsoka's call, or find out why an Imperial bounty was being issued in a back alley cantina on a remote planet wasteland by a cloaked figure. "Ahsoka, no, I must protest," Obi-Wan said, rising to his feet. "I know what compels you to see the boy, I truly do, and I made this abundantly clear to Master Yoda for precisely the same reason, knowing full well that would be your wish and intention, but it would only skew what his destiny holds." Ahsoka was beginning to show the frustration she was wringing visibly, and Obi-Wan's exhale confirmed it as she again looked at him. "Please understand, Ahsoka, that there is nothing to be gained for anything you could offer Luke. Had I thought it wise, I would have trained him myself. There is nothing to save him from, as he is in the safest place imaginable. No score could be settled by consoling or counseling him of past events until he asked the questions necessary to deliver him into his destiny. Do you understand that even the slightest altercation of events could divert him from that path? We play just as big a part in his future by doing nothing as he does through ignorance. That is the wisdom at play here." Obi-Wan took a deep breath after the recitation. Master, yes, I do understand, she replied, again looking into the approaching dusk through the window, the color play not lost on her senses. This indeed was a beautiful planet. I just wanted to see, and can't explain why. Obi-Wan stopped himself from rolling his eyes. You don't need to, young one, and yes, you do know why. Anakin was our brother, and seeing his son would bring that reminiscence. The price to be paid for that is the anguish of fleeting memories rushing in right behind them, and for what gain? Ahsoka couldn't answer that question, and didn't want to. She felt fear and anger within herself when she last faced Vader, and she conquered them both, channeling them into an unpredictable fighting force that he couldn't keep up with. But the emotional mess she had returned to Malachor in was the price. What would seeing the son of Anakin yield? What would being able to converse with the boy produce? Confusion, malice, fear, hatred. Yes, she fully understood Obi-Wan's message, and why her involvement in the events to come could waylay his path. What struck her at the moment was the authority Obi-Wan had given to the situation for all these years. How he had moved well past traditional Jedi practice and doctrine, and left the entire matter in the hands of fate and choice. It would be Luke's choice and no one else, although there was something Obi-Wan wasn't telling her. Or maybe it was simply because she had yet to ask. Master, what is coming? She knew the question was precisely what he had anticipated as she turned slowly to face him again. Hope, Ahsoka, hope. I've been privy to its ascendancy for some time, as would be natural with how I've situated myself in exile. Not just for Luke's sake, for others as well. You, for instance. I feel the force within you vying for dominance, but you've been able to balance the scale because you don't let yourself succumb to either side too strongly. I feel the dark ebbing its way into your thoughts, but you are shutting the door to all but the lessons it could impart. The power that can bring is, and will forever be, dynamic as soon as you learn to control it. But to Luke, and his sister, I might add, a new generation is taking the mantle, Ahsoka, as well it should. A new hope, he concluded, staring out the window. I sense it too, Master, and want to know I'm doing my part. Please help guide me, as there are so many questions that I can't ask because I don't have the knowledge or wisdom. You're right about the dark. It fills the void when the light subsides, but never to the point where I can't pull myself back, or at least I haven't yet. But I need to know how to control it. I need Master Yoda for this, Ahsoka said without hesitation. Dagobah. And Ahsoka, you must know that events are already taking place that will reshape the galaxy. What part you play in it depends entirely on you. Master Yoda is expecting you, Obi-Wan added with a smile. Ahsoka added her smile to that warming comment as she brought her wrist to calm Kawani for pickup. Kawani, ready when you are, she began, looking out Obi-Wan's doorway at the now setting suns and how the oranges, reds, and yellows gave way to blues, purples, and dark greens. The lack of a reception ring from her outgoing comm snapped her out of the landscape reverie. Kawani? She repeated twice more. Master, something is wrong. I have to go. Always on the move, Obi-Wan said with a smile. May the Force be with you, Ahsoka. Surprisingly, he pulled her in for an embrace she wasn't prepared for, and held back a tear of understanding. May the Force be with you, Master, Ahsoka said with more meaning than ever. Parting ways at his door, she slowly made her way to the speeder, which waited patiently for her, casting a glance over her shoulder only once, burning into her memory the wizened face of the oldest and dearest friend she would ever know. She turned the bike on its repulsor to leave the cliffside the way she had come, tears now unchecked and streaming down her cheeks. Kawani, nestled between a Godel and Korovar for a few hands of sabacc after determining to return to the cantina, decided to deactivate her comm to detract any unwanted attention. Her goal set squarely on spotting the cloaked figure again after confirming there was no rush of attention from her earlier escapade. She let the setting dictate her projection and fit in almost invisibly. She knew she could spot the figure without question. Her skill at sabak, however, was another matter. Feeling she was probably drawing more attention from the glorious way she was losing, she bowed out of the next few hands to scan the increasing crowd. The cantina was at capacity as darkness fell, becoming more raucous with each passing minute. If she didn't locate the figure soon, she might not at all, the thought looming large and the need to get back to her ship. She pulled her hood over her head and squirmed out of the packed area to find a spot closer to the door, making it easier to spot incoming and outgoing patrons with greater ease and prepare herself for a hasty exit should that need arise. The spaceports come alive at night with the passage into the night on Tatooine, and gathering places are overcrowded quickly. The recyclers are switched off and cooler desert air is fed in with a house mixture of exotic scents derived from sources both legitimate and non. The music transitions from a swinging jizz to a more local talent in the form of percussion and harmonic beats, played on instruments crafted from the bones, hides, and entrails of native wildlife. The mood was set to a more primitive atmosphere, which had been a stellar business decision years earlier as the coffers overflowed into the intoxicating surroundings. Began in Mos Eisley and now established heartily in every cantina worth visiting on the planet, Kawani was not new to Tatooine's custom. She was, however, not having any luck finding her current person of interest, a fact not lost on her as she scanned the ever-increasing crowd again. She had completed her visual and returned it in reverse order when she spotted an Iktochi staring intently at her from the other side of the bar. At least she was confident that the Iktochi was staring at her previously, as he had seemed to have diverted his attention to the dancing Twi'leks. Two Twi'lek females began entertaining the patrons around them, with an arousing sensual dance canted with precision to the melodic beats, arms reaching in the air and falling at the sides of one another. Kawani glanced back at the Iktochi, looking at her this time, and studied his face and features. The right horn was broken at the tip, and the left cracked and peeled. His face made a blank statement, conveying nothing. Kawani immediately imparted her senses to detect the flow of force around him, and was interested in seeing the currents moving faster into him than flowing out, as if he were pulling upon it. A force user. One pulling it inward with purpose. She maintained his focus, belying nothing of her own emotions to him. He was going to have his work cut out for him. Without registering an ounce of fear, she stared intently into his eyes as if they were the only ones in the room, baiting him to make the first move. She was glad she was close to the door, as the crowd was getting increasingly intoxicated, and the grace of fresh air rushing into the room right past her. Without taking her gaze from his, she slipped a hand down into her cloak and tapped the comm at her adjacent wrist to activate it and send a short burst of distress to Ahsoka. Had the Iktochi noticed the movement? She wasn't sure, but he got up from his seat the moment she made to touch the comm and began moving slowly toward her. Keeping a visual on him was her priority. Keeping herself moving while doing so was her second. With that, she got up, playing with interest in the conversation at the table closer to the door. He was getting closer, and she lost sight of his right hand, a long black cloak draped over his shoulders that fell to his ankles, his left hand still visible at his waist. Leaving nothing to chance, she ducked under the outstretched arm of the door bouncer and into the street with haste. She tapped her comm in a quick cadence to alert R3 to get the ship ready. She made for the hangar bay, a brisk walk at first, followed by an all-out sprint to the hangar after a glance over her shoulder found the Iktochi right on her trail. Ahsoka was relieved in the first instance to receive the transmission on her wrist comm, which became trepidation when the coded distress was revealed. Angling the bike to a more direct path to Mos Eisley, she cared little how the more rugged terrain may damage the vehicle if she were to miss a crevasse, escarpment, or large boulder, but more than compensated for it with her heightened senses. She hadn't accounted for the large number of nocturnal insects forcibly sacrificing themselves onto any exposed body part she couldn't tuck into the confines of the bike frame or contain under the wrappings of her cloak. her head taking the worst of it. Large beetle-like winged carnivores leaving welts on her face, Leku and Montrals as they burst open with considerable force. Cursing the little beasts, she began slight force pushes to keep the way clear as much as possible, but the encumbrance of the act left her unable to keep the throttle open. Sacrificing comfort for speed, she tucked her head down as much as possible, regripped both handles with authority, and gunned the bike to its capacity. Kawani, contemplating the wisdom of latching onto the Togruta in the first place, was going to be overtaken by the Iktochi, who was giving chase any... Damn it, Ahsoka, where are you? She thought as her chest tightened from the increasingly heavy breathing she had to employ. One more glance forward to judge distance, and her mind made up to end this madness here and now. She stopped in her tracks, and in one swift motion, unholstered her blaster and came to bear on her. Huh? He wasn't there. Not good, she told herself. I was hoping we could discuss a few things, and here you want to get violent right away. Kawani heard but couldn't place. She spun in all directions looking for its source, finding nothing but street trash, food vendors, and intoxicated townsfolk. The chill overtakes the murderer's soul. She does not see what is right in front of her. Her hand was still outstretched with the blaster in tow, spinning madly to source the voice that sounded from all directions, daring not to pull the trigger for fear of hitting an unintended target. Panic was beginning to set in, which gives way to fear, she mouthed. Closing herself from that thought completely, she withdrew her weapon while standing down. She channeled all her energy into locating the force flows, remembering how they were manipulated by the Iktochi earlier, and looking for ribbons of stagnation in that flow. The Iktochi knew he was compromised instantly, as he could not pull in nor release the force energy without giving up his position to this Mirialan. A low chuckle came from Kawani's right, and she slowly brought the blaster up to eye level as the Iktochi manifested out of seemingly thin air. Wise Mirialan, remind me never to sit across the Dejeric table from you, but Sabak, on the other hand, I'll match you any day, the Iktochi said with a hint of sarcasm. I will either pull this trigger now and add one more to the head count today, or you can tell me what you want, and then I pull the trigger anyway, Kawani said smoothly and calmly. Again with the violence. I mean only to inquire about your interest in my bounty. My business, she said, firing simultaneously, catching the Iktochi in the shoulder, although it should have been between his eyes. I wasn't exaggerating, she finalized. Raising a hand to his shoulder, he pressed hard, and it began to mend itself from the inside out. What little confidence she had left upon seeing that was significantly exaggerated by the stoicism she would not relent in her steely gaze. I see that, Mary Allen. The hole in his cloak remained, but the light brown skin underneath was whole again. Taking his time to sweep the long cloak from his body, he revealed a tan black synth leather jerkin and matching leggings. The saber hilt at his hip was most concerning, however. Like a child in full tantrum, a shrill sound took them both from their offensive objectives, as it echoed through the street, its source coming their way. A massive cloud of dust and sand in its wake, creating the illusion of an approaching storm. Catching her friend in the headlight, Ahsoka leapt from the seat as the bike skidded to an unheroic, momentum-filled carom into parked speeders a few meters away. She landed within striking range of the Iktochi and took her time repositioning herself. Kawani and the Iktochi weren't quite sure what just happened or what this creature was in their midst. The looks of befuddlement and confusion caused Ahsoka to pause and give herself a once-over. Arms and legs caked in broken insect bodies, with green slime oozing from every inch of her. She could only imagine what the parts of her she couldn't see looked like, as she spit out the thorax and abdomen of her latest winged victim with an audible gag. Ahsoka? Kawani managed. The Togruta? The Iktochi wondered, hoping he had the species right. Present, she tried to convey with a hearty belch and one final spit to get the wing bits out of her teeth. The Iktochi made for his saber without a second thought, ignited it, and brought it forward defensively. Ahsoka was shocked at the purple blade she had seen only once before. Sensing a Force user, but more interested in the saber, she studied it intently as notions of personal appearance evaporated and knew it was the same from memory. The intricacy with which Master Windu had crafted his lightsaber was iconic, the gold and silver woven together with the black ribbed hilt. "Where did you get that?" It wasn't a question. Her eyes lowered and her teeth bared. She immediately felt the anger flowing easily into every fiber of her being. The level of rage she felt in the moment was staggering, and she willed herself to channel it into a means of power without giving into the bloodlust it was directing her towards. She told herself to assess the opponent over and over as her rage was directing her towards swift aggression, which she knew would be a mistake if she didn't take the time to identify her strengths and weaknesses. Iktochi were almost always force sensitive and had a penchant for premonition, characteristically aggressive with little analytical prowess. She would have to become unpredictable and lightning fast. He hastened back into a defensive stance, thereby assuring her of motive. Locking his gaze, she moved around him to put herself between the two as Kawani moved back. Ahsoka had yet to reveal any of her lightsabers, but instead she completed the blocking maneuver with the arms outstretched, pushing against any forthcoming aggression through the Force. Slowly she trod, foot over foot, as she assessed the unfolding situation. "Ahsoka Tano, you will come with me. The condition of your retrieval is alive only. What form of alive is completely up to you," the Iktochi stated flatly. Showing no signs of fear, or any emotion for that matter, he had remained unmoving to keep his target directly in front of him. Kawani tensed upon seeing the rush of Force energy into the Iktochi, knowing that whatever was coming was about to take place. She could also feel the flows in and around Ahsoka, but noted the not-so-subtle differences in how it presented itself. The flow into Ahsoka was deliberate, constant, and unfiltered. She had seen the flows Ahsoka called upon herself, but this was far greater than anything she had witnessed prior. The waves were more prominent, the currents stronger. She was even diverting energies from the Iktochi's inflow, which he also realized. Kawani then studied his reactions, telling her everything she needed to know. He was beginning to realize that he would be overwhelmed, and his wide eyes betrayed his confidence from earlier. The thin lines appearing on his cheeks gave away the tension he was trying hard to tuck away. The crease in his forehead began to display the faintest speck of fear in that he had underestimated the ease of this endeavor. With deliberate intent, Ahsoka was unmoved by the Iktochi's mannerisms, still fixated on the blade and any associated meaning his having it might entail. Pulling herself entirely into the moment, she armed herself instantly with both her sabers, taking another moment before igniting them. Aware of the surroundings and what detection might bring upon both her and Kawani, she began to go back into the alleyway behind her. Kawani moved to compensate for the distance, step for step, with Ahsoka keeping a vigilant eye on the Iktochi. They both realized something was not right with the encounter at the same time. With a passive swing of her secondary saber, Ahsoka thought to test the defensive stance employed by the Iktochi, and felt immediate resolution of her instinct as it passed harmlessly through the form, leaving a snaking trail of thick blackish smoke that was quickly dissipating where he had been. Kawani had seen the Force energy flow cease to exist, as if watching water quickly soaking into dry ground. "So easily drawn into the open, Miss Tano. I was advised to expect a great deal of difficulty in claiming your capture, but it seems that is not quite the case." The Iktochi's voice was instantly everywhere, on the wind as a whisper, in their chests and heads. Ahsoka immediately began concentrating on the form and her anatomical insights to locate the now considerably more formidable opponent. Pleasantries abandoned, tisk tisk, where have manners descended? I wonder, it continued. The only question I want answered I've already asked. Beyond that, let's get this over with. I have other matters to attend to, Ahsoka stated with growing rage. She felt the surge of Force energy immediately. She somersaulted backward to bring both of her blades crossed in defense of Kawani's head, stopping the downward strike intended to bring her a quick death with the reemergence of the saber-wielding Iktochi. With an arcing boom, all three blades fought for superiority. Kawani dodged out of the way and rolled to a position immediately behind Ahsoka. Ahsoka herself force-pushing upward to suspend the strobing purple energy beam in place for a sweeping reverse arc of her primary, again finding no purchase and leaving the deathly black trail behind it. The Itochi's design clearly stated, Kawani quickly reversed her feet to stand back-to-back with her friend and do her best to match the Togruta's footwork, immediately noting how difficult that task would be in and of itself. Understanding the motive without a word, Ahsoka reverted to a defensive stance, her objective being Kawani's protection first and foremost. So very quick on her feet, Ahsoka Tano is indeed a treasure, the voice returned. It seems a hasty end to this may not be so easy. Ahsoka, he's stalling, Kawani stated quickly. Ahsoka didn't need to be told, and was ever vigilant of the enormous threat Imperial detection would cause. Clearly, she said in return with a hint of sarcasm. The attack came again from the side in a blinding flash of purple, at Ahsoka's right, meant to glance her saber to the fore, clearing the space between her and Kawani for a well-aimed thrust through Kawani's midsection. Kawani sensed the distraction as Ahsoka sensed the distraction as Kawani noted the peculiarities of the current force concentration around the entire scene. She noticed the surge in the flow just before each of the last two strikes, but was not near quick enough to evade or even see the lightsaber coming at her either time. Ahsoka grappled with the forced parry and felt the surge of anger driving her right arm to merely deflect the incoming blade behind her, thwarting the Itochi's attempt at free passage. She immediately sensed his presence shift and didn't bother with an offensive attack this time. She is beginning to learn, the voice again taunted. Kawani tapped Ahsoka on her left shoulder and felt what she was seeing. The flow was directed to her left side now, and she immediately crossed her blades as an overhand strike came sailing down to finish in the sizzling and booming energy arc as the three blades met each other once again. Quickly, Ahsoka pulled her in her primary and called on the Force to push the assailant back into the wall behind him, only to see the thick smoke billow upon the dried mud and whitewash of the structure, leaving fractures and dust in its wake. Ahsoka picked up on Kawani's ability to sense his location through her ability to pinpoint Force energy flows and was more confident in her survival. She also knew this needed to end now. She felt behind for Kawani's right hand and slipped her ignited secondary into her waiting palm, Kawani realizing precisely what the intention was. For a moment, Ahsoka was nostalgic, not remembering the last time she had fought back-to-back with another brandishing a lightsaber. And just as quickly, it was over. Kawani saw it coming and Ahsoka sensed it. The purple blade was uppercutting toward the saber in Kawani's hand, intent on knocking it free of his target. Ahsoka reached behind her in a blinding flash, retrieving her newly built saber, and felt Kawani duck. Without hesitation, Ahsoka rolled over Kawani's back, ignited her red blade, and buried it into the Itochi's skull. His form fell to the ground as Ahsoka pulled her saber free and switched them both off. Taking a moment to let the events register, she attached her sabers to her waist and slowly grabbed Kawani's hand as she retrieved her other saber in the same movement. Kawani said nothing as they both looked back and forth from the crumpled body to the still ignited purple blade. We must be quick about this. I am sure we attracted attention. Not taking the time to confirm the assumption, Ahsoka went straight to work deactivating the humming saber, stowing it away into the pouch at her side, and began rifling through pockets and pouches as Kawani joined in. Credit chips, a small holo transceiver, Starship Axis identity chip, and his wrist comm. They would debrief themselves quickly, but getting out of this alley was their priority. Assured they grabbed anything of note off the Itochi, Ahsoka pulled the cloak's hood up over her lifeless body and set it against the cracked wall. Pulling out the Starship Axis ID, she motioned for Kawani to follow her. Two stormtroopers were coming up the right side of the street. She stepped out of the alley with purpose, right in front of the two, waving her hand quickly. Well done, Private. You've apprehended the murderer. I assume you're taking him right back to the garrison under arrest? Ahsoka said with enthusiasm. Both helmeted troopers tipped their heads in confusion, first at her, then at each other. Feeling the need to clarify to whom the congratulations were given, she chose the one on the right. You are taking him into custody, right? The garrison provost will commend your heroic act surely. The detaining trooper removed the blaster from the detainee's hands. You're under arrest. Move, you. I am under arrest, the detainee said with authority. I said move, trooper, the private explained, shoving his prisoner forward. As they moved in the opposite direction, Kawani just shook her head. That never gets old, Ahsoka said aloud. Back to the starship ID. The ship is registered as the Deep 7 and is on the other end of town near your ship, Kawani, Ahsoka said, scanning the area again to ensure there was no other onlookers. We'll learn more aboard it. Ahsoka being your friend is sure interesting, Kawani said, laughing lightly as they made their way to the hangar 35. Honestly, I don't think the action stops with you around. That's been my life, out of the pot and into the fire, time after time. You can see why forming friendships, or any relationships for that matter, has been difficult, Ahsoka replied. I can understand that, and thank you for taking that time with me, by the way. We made a hell of a team back there, Kawani returned. Ahsoka smiled. We sure did, she finished, clapping Kawani on the back. By the way, sorry about the speeder. Kawani shrugged it off as they headed for the hangar bay. Add that to the shuttle you already owe me.